All right. My name is Jason Hubbard. I'm Vice President of Partnerships and Alliances here at Sales Intel. And then we have Nicole Kelly here with us. She is market strategist and researcher. We've done, this is our second webinar that Nicole and I have done. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you so much.
All right. So agenda today. So Nicole put together a really interesting survey of marketing leaders in the B2B space, in particular looking at, emotional intelligence in the workplace. Nicole has run some of the biggest, most comprehensive studies on emotional intelligence in the workplace. So she's a fantastic resource to have on. You guys are in for a treat. So we're going to review some of the survey questions that when we looked at it, looked most interesting and insightful to us. Then take that and some conclusions that we're drawing from it, as well as implications as far as best practices and in ways that you can apply these insights to the office itself. So we'll jump right into that. Nicole, we'll let you sort of introduce or lead with the question and the results, and then we can sort of dive into what we see as the implications for it.
Absolutely. So this study, I reached out to 19,000 Fortune 1000 chief marketing officers, vice president of marketing, everyone in the sales and marketing space. And basically we asked them questions about emotional intelligence, and then we also asked them questions about their marketing performance. The hypothesis coming into this study was that there would be some kind of correlation between emotional intelligence and marketing performance. This is the first time that we've released any of the results, so I'm so excited that all of you are here to kind of see what the results of this were. For the first question that we decided to discuss today, we asked, how often do you ask your team members how they're feeling? We know that many times when we walk through the hall and we see someone, or now when we are on a Zoom meeting, we say, how are you? This is specific to saying, how are you feeling? We found that 44% usually ask, 28% always ask, 25% sometimes ask, and 4% rarely ask. Now, from my perspective, I found this a little surprising because often when I've been walking through the halls, I hear the how are you question. But we can tell that for marketing leaders, we actually are tuning into emotions a lot more than we would probably expect from other executives. So this is what the survey said. Jason, do you want to kind of lead the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think similar to you, I was surprised to see the level that people self-reported that they were asking this type of question. Most of my experience has been similar to yours. People tend to do it just sort of as an impulse, like, how's it going or whatever. Asking how you're feeling is something that I hear less often. So these results were surprising in a positive way. I did not expect that level, and I think it's really interesting your insider hypothesis that this may be specific to the department and the audience, so it may not be as widely applicable to business leaders as a whole as it is to marketers in particular. Anybody who's spent time in marketing knows that we tend to be built a little bit differently as far as how we approach things and look at them. And of course, part of marketing is figuring out how to work with other people's emotions and their psychology to try and get them to come to the conclusions or take the actions that you want them to. So I think there's a good chance that that's part of what's playing into it.
Yeah, and I think in the marketing space in particular, the reason that this is so important is that creatives in particular tend to be more emotional themselves. As a creative, we tend to be in tune with our emotions, but we also can experience high waves of emotion. What I've noticed throughout the industry in terms of, you look at the rates of depression and how people are feeling and having a challenge managing their emotions, I see a much higher percentage of marketers who actually are open about the fact that they have struggled with depression in the past or they've had high and low moods. So in the marketing industry in particular, this is really important to be asking the question how you're feeling, especially today. What's happening with COVID and what's happening outside of the world, we're actually seeing that people are experiencing what we call survival emotions. And survival emotions are dealing with how you feel about acceptance, safety, approval, and control. So right now, our safety is being shaken up, whether we're worried about our job or our partner's job, or we're worried about the economic output as a whole. You know, there's an economic downturn, that we have unemployment at the highest rate since the Great Depression. So our safety is coming right under attack. Then we also are in a situation where we can't necessarily get the approval things that we used to get. We're trying to kind of fill that with social media, with our likes and things like that, but we're not getting that high five that we used to get from our coworkers. So that's come under attack. And additionally, control. We have absolutely no control. If you do a SWOT analysis of what's happening in the world, these are external threats. They're things that we have no control over. We don't know when the economy is going to open back up. We don't know if there's going to be another influx of COVID that's going to shut business down. So it's really important for leaders today to be asking not the cursory, how are you feeling, but really, how are you feeling right now? How are things going for you? What's happening at home, so that you have insight into someone's behavior at work? It's very natural right now to see people maybe having behaviors that you haven't expected before. If you start to see that maybe tensions get higher, this stuff happens because as you look at, you know, text communication as an example, we can't tell the tone of a text communication. So if there's ever been tension between two people, you might see an escalated tension now. So I think this is a really important question for all leaders to be asking.
Yeah. And one thing to note here early on as we're going through these results, this survey predated COVID. So
yes,
it would be interesting to go back after and see how this has changed. But that's a good caveat to it, is the results we're looking at here are pre-COVID, not post.
Yeah, they were third quarter 2019.
Nicole, I think I know the answer to this, but we had a question specific to this. When we say usually, there wasn't anything in there that dictated or specified what usually entails, as far as you know, is that daily, weekly, monthly, whatever?
Yeah, we didn't ask the question that way, but it would definitely be a good follow-up question to ask next time.
Right. And then, yeah, one other thing on the creative side, like, you know, a lot of marketing leaders, obviously, a lot are creatives, a lot are also, you know, analytic or more managerial, whatever. But I think one of the crucial aspects to that is, no matter what category they fall into, they're having to manage creatives. So even if you don't fall into that bucket, you're having to manage and work with people that fit that general bucket. So
well, and interestingly enough, on the analytical side, you know, I say this often, you know, our brain is like a central processing unit for a computer, and it just runs fast, especially with the analytical mind. We tend to have brains that run super, super fast. But if what's going through your mind is, it's kind of junk in, junk out. So this is also a time to kind of monitor what kind of thoughts you're having, what kind of things you're spending your mind share on. Because if you're spending your mind share on things that feel heavy, then you're going to have heaviness, you know, bleed into work as well. And just another point of, like, you know, when you ask someone how they're feeling, you can actually feel whether or not they're being honest with you. And if you are sensing that maybe someone is struggling, this is a time that it's really important to just like connect on a personal level and really find out, get to the root cause of what's happening. One of the things that I really appreciate about our executive team is that when our CEO and I have like something where it feels a little uncomfortable, he picks up the phone immediately and calls me and says, hey, I felt really uncomfortable about that conversation. And it's created an open dialogue where we actually have built a much stronger relationship about that. And it might just be something like you're having a bad day. It might not be, it might be nothing, but it could be something.
Yep. All right, let's get into the next one before we get crunched on time. All right, so question 2, let you run with this.
Yeah, so the next question is, how do you respond when someone around you is experiencing a high intensity of emotion? I found this really interesting because we gave them a lot of options of how they respond. And overwhelmingly, people said that they help and comfort them. I did find it funny, a little bit, you know, just kind of funny and anecdotal that, you know, when you have the option to join them, I don't know if you've ever experienced this when you're in the workplace, but somebody's having a really bad day and you walk by, you see they're having a bad day, and then the next thing you know, you're having a bad day. I think there is the instinctual, accidental joining, and then there's the like intentional joining people. We also included avoid them and confront them and also fix them. You know, there are some people, and I have had to like monitor myself on this, of trying to fix someone else's problem when something is going on because you see that they're having a high intensity of emotion. I think that this is starting to show that where corporate America used to be this place that was very emotionless and we were told to repress our emotions, and emotions weren't okay in the workplace. I think this is starting to show us that we are evolving, and in the workplace, emotions are coming with, people accepting that we have emotions, but not only that, we actually are wanting to help people and comfort them when they're having high intensity of emotion. Now, the one thing that this question didn't ask is what the emotion was. So you are starting to see a little bit about what people's preconceived notions are around high intensity emotion. Help them and comfort them definitely alludes to people feeling that they were having a high intensity of like anger, something that was more on the kind of what we would call the lower spectrum of emotion. But you equally could have a high intensity of emotion that's joy and bliss. But you can see that we as a society definitely feel that that high intensity kind of fits into that lower end of the spectrum.
Yeah, I thought the reinforcement of what I would hope we would see was really really encouraging here, that we've made progress on this front, as far as making the workplace safer for emotions, being more accepting of it, and that's something I've definitely seen change over time. I mean, both of my parents were serial entrepreneurs, so like I literally grew up in business, and that was not common, 30 plus years ago. So things have changed a lot, and so it's reassuring seeing this. And then yeah, I'm definitely guilty of the fix them thing. That was one of the biggest things I had to learn in my relationship with my wife. Was most of the time she just wants me to listen, not try and fix it. So that's one I've been badly guilty of.
I think we've all been there.
Cool. All right. So how would you handle an employee who's experiencing an extremely difficult emotion? So we were specific on what type of emotion here.
Yeah, so I wanted to be very specific that they were experiencing a difficult emotional situation and that it was affecting their performance at work. If you look at anyone who is perhaps even a caregiver of, so like someone with a disease or some debilitation, these people often have things that are happening outside of work. If you're going through a divorce, like there's all kinds of personal situations that can affect your performance at work, and it likely is impacting things like focus and ability to deliver the output that you previously were. So I wanted to see like, hey, someone's having a rough time at home. It's affecting their performance. What do you do with that? What we found, again, this supports that emotions are continuing to be safer at work. They said they would personally work with them. They would personally work with them and include human resources for additional resources, or they would refer them to HR. And the resounding results were they would work with them, or they would work with them and involve HR. And I think that this is an emotionally intelligent behavior. It's showing that we're not looking to oust people who are going through something personally. We're actually looking to keep that employee engaged and give them resources so that they can be helped through that situation.
Did you take anything from the fact that more people preferred to work with them personally versus work with them personally and include HR?
I think that we could, just as an executive myself, I could see why I might want to work with someone personally before referring them to human resources, which is often considered an escalation, and that it then goes on that person's personal record. So what I took away with this is that you have executives who are taking personal accountability to help their staff through something, versus just referring to them to HR. Now, the way that this question was worded was I would refer them to HR to make sure they had all the resources available to them. So it wasn't worded in a way that had a negative connotation around referring them to HR. But when you're talking about the Fortune 1000, the minute that you're referred to HR, it's a little bit different than if you're working for a small company.
I agree. I mean, that's definitely how I would approach it. Try and see if you can help resolve it first, and then reach out to additional resources as needed.
Yeah, I really felt this was reassuring for executive leaders who are really taking accountability to help somebody on their own, and that they would take that accountability. It's very easy to pass the buck, and say, oh, this is a really challenging situation. I don't know how to deal with it, so I'm just going to refer them to HR. But to see a high percentage of people, because you look at this and it's, 80, 90, 95% almost, you're seeing they're taking some level of personal accountability. And I think that that's a huge step for the Fortune 1000 in emotional intelligence.
Right. Yeah, and I was like you. This reassured me about the stuff I was talking about earlier about how the workplace is changing.
Mhm.
All right. Question 4: how do you respond when you experience heightened emotions in the office?
Yeah, so I wanted to get really clear about what do you do when you have big emotions? Like, are we just expressing our emotions out and throwing them all over the office, or are we actually doing something to resolve them inside of ourselves? And, the key with emotional intelligence is two things. One, you're aware of what emotion that you're dealing with. And two, you know how to integrate that emotion in a way that doesn't necessarily affect others in a negative way. So this fell right in line with that. We found that 40% take a break, 39% communicate. Now, the interesting thing about this is I'm a take a breaker, but there are other people who are communicators. So if you're dealing with somebody who's a take a breaker and you're a communicator, there can be a little tension around that because the communicator wants to communicate about what's happening, but some people actually need to step away. They need to actually process it internally. So knowing what kind of people you have on your team is really important, and honoring what that person actually needs. So 40% take a break, 39% communicate, right in line with each other. And then 22% take a deep breath, 12% meditate, 10% keep it to themselves and never actually deal with it, 7% take control, and then 6% are still in that reaction mode. Now, the thing about this too is that you have to understand people are self-reporting. I, of course, would be curious as to if we could actually monitor how people actually respond. You would probably find a much higher percentage of people who react before they actually stop and take a break and actually communicate about it.
Yeah, it'll also be interesting to get the flip side of it from the people they manage.
Yeah,
It's always interesting to
exactly.
compare how people self-report versus the people they manage report. Uh,
Yeah, but these are definitely great tools that you can use as well. As you're learning how to navigate your own emotions in the workplace, these are great tools that anyone can use.
One other thing on to explain to people the way the survey was conducted. Obviously, if you add these up, it's over 100%.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how the question was structured?
Yeah, so they were allowed to select three. So this is their stack rank of three options.
Got it. Got it. All right. This one was the one I thought was one of the most interesting ones.
Yeah, so this one is in the last 30 days, which emotions have you felt in the office and at what level of intensity? So this is basically ranked with the highest intensity at the top, so high level of intensity. And what we found was, which honestly was surprising for me, kind of growing up in corporate America and in some corporate environments where, there's lots of stress and anxiety. You see achievement right next to stress, and then followed by joy, pride, excitement, fulfillment, inspiration, gratitude, and then we get to anxiety. Then you have elation jump in. Then we have disappointment, anger, fear, depression, guilt, and shame. What this is telling me is that corporate America has evolved significantly over the last 10 years. The corporate environment, used to be very stressful, anxiety ridden. We were, forced to kind of keep work in one bucket and home life in another. There was no blending between the two. So this is really kind of telling me that in the workplace, people are generally feeling very satisfied. They're generally enjoying their jobs. They have high levels of stress. That's something that, honestly, for your physical health, stress is it releases neurochemicals that affect your whole body and make you susceptible to disease and illness. So it's something that we do need to manage as a workforce. But seeing so many of these high positive emotions coming from corporate executives is really reassuring as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was very pleasantly surprised by this one to see, basically everything other than stress and anxiety, which, of course, we all associate with work, and I think most of us experience fairly regularly there. But all, the other what we would commonly refer to as negative emotions were universally at the bottom of this,
Yeah.
which was very pleasantly surprising.
Yeah, and again, this would be an interesting one to run again post COVID, right? Because this might have flip flopped for some people, depending on, you're working at home now, you're homeschooling your children, you're trying to work in your bedroom, like I was talking about earlier. You've got all these kind of external inputs that you can't control. That might actually flip the equation. We don't really know because we haven't run it again, but it would be really interesting to look at today.
Yep. I think this is our last question, but how often do you have regrets about the way you responded to something at work? I assume that there wasn't anything more specific when it came to something.
No, it's just, do you regret things that you've done at work, right?
Yep.
So 49% rarely, 43% sometimes, so we're right on the mix of this one. And I think, as leaders, that, there's the sometimes I think is a positive sign of reflection. If we're walking through life and we think that we're doing everything right and there's nothing that we have regrets about, we might not be self-reflecting, or we might actually have a really positive relationship with ourselves where we don't necessarily regret, but that doesn't mean we don't reflect.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the follow-up question I would have liked to ask is, do you have regrets and do you reflect, and get a yes or no on that? Because both of these show that we're evolving as a corporate leadership teams, but they also show that, sometimes we do things that we might not want to do again. And that's part of the learning process. I always say every experience is either a gift or a lesson. I know that came from somewhere, I can't remember the source, but everything is a gift or a lesson. And some of the gifts are times where maybe you do regret something that you did, but it's your biggest growth opportunity, both as a person and as a leader.
Absolutely. All right. So bringing it all together, what did we find in this? So yeah, we've hit on a lot of this, but Billings' experience in the workplace have been generally positive, fulfilling. Like I said, the question, 2 questions back, were all of the negative ones, apart from anxiety and stress, were at the bottom. That was my favorite one, but there were indications of this in some of the other questions as well. Indications that management, especially in marketing, are supportive of others' emotions. Both of those were very pleasantly surprising findings in this, especially as to the degree that they were that way. I mean, it wasn't like it was sort of middling or anything. It was pretty definitive. And then a conclusion out of this, and this is one we touched on, especially post COVID. We need to increase the amount that we're proactively reaching out and asking these questions, because the natural interactions largely don't happen, or not as easy to happen as stopping by somebody's office, passing them in the hall, whatever. And like you mentioned, a message on Slack, an email, a text message. It's hard to read into those reliably a lot of the time. So, being explicit about what you're doing. One thing that I've really tried to do with my team in particular is make sure that I'm checking in with them on a video call on a regular basis, and doing that in a small enough format that they can't just sort of hide in the crowd and keep their mouth shut. What about you, Nicole? What have you seen, especially post-COVID, when it comes to this?
Yeah, text-based communication is something that you need to be very cognizant about. You need to read it in the tone as if you were being rude, even if you didn't intend to, if you're not being rude. Like, put that tone on it, and then look at it and see how someone might interpret it. Look at how someone might interpret it if maybe they're feeling questionable about their job, if they're concerned about their employment. Could they interpret that in a different way? So I like to wear hats. So I wear the hat of, I'm the person who always gives, grace to everyone and always assumes that everyone's coming from the best perspective. How does that look? Now I put on the hat of, I assume that everybody is out to get me and out to attack me. And then I read it again. And if it doesn't jive on both of those fronts, then I reword it until it does. Another thing that's really important is that as you're communicating, there will be times where you say something that is misinterpreted by someone else. And I'm a big fan of Chris Brogan and Trust Agents. He had a 3A approach to this. And he said, the first thing you do is acknowledge. So acknowledge that something has happened. I acknowledge, that my communication didn't come across as intended. I apologize that it didn't come across as intended. And now act. What am I going to do as a result of that? I'm either going to, let's have a post-up conversation about it. I'm going to address it in a different way. But, essentially, you know, apologize, acknowledge, and act. And that really kind of diffuses things. One thing that you've noticed is, you know, Jason, I don't know if you've ever dealt with trolls online, but I have dealt with a few in my social media days. You can diffuse things simply by just acknowledging someone's feelings, acknowledging their emotions. And that goes a really long way. And one of our attendees, you know, is talking about that, you know, she had to deal with an employee and the employee wasn't taking accountability for responsibilities, but was also a communicator in regards to defending or blaming her. And she was about sharing her opinion, and did not have to respond per her HR rep, but the person was very disrespectful. And the truth of the matter is that, you know, as a society, as communicators, as marketers, as salespeople, we have created a world of heroes, villains, and victims. It's the way that we tell stories. You see it in the media. You see it in every movie. You see it in every, you know, piece of music that's put out. We have created this patterning around heroes and villains and victims, and we do it in media, and then we forget that it actually parlays into people's lives and how they view others. So if you're dealing with someone who maybe is villainizing you or maybe feels like a victim, then it's really important for you to kind of just acknowledge that that's happening. And then, you know, find a way to kind of find common ground with them, okay? If you can find common ground somewhere, then you're likely to be able to diffuse the situation. And if you can't, just recognize some people are caught in a pattern that they are not willing to recognize, nor do they want to resolve.
Yeah. One that sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Oh, so yeah, talking about tone in text and stuff like that. One thing that I found myself having to lean on really heavily, something that I used to sort of disdain, is emojis. Especially for me, like I tend to be, you know, kind of snarky or sarcastic in my sense of humor. And I've realized the hard way, I've got to be really careful about that, especially as most of the communication has moved to text-based.
Yeah.
So making sure people know what I'm trying to get at or say, and that I'm not trying to be mean or anything like that.
Yeah, and you know what? I think that emojis are the language of emotional intelligence. I can send an emoji and I can communicate something that would take 30 words to communicate. So, you know, I often, people are like, you use a lot of emojis, and I'm like, yeah, it's actually like it's the reason is because it's important to me that the sentiment comes across with that message. So I'm a big fan of the wink. I'm a big fan of the smile. When food is yummy, I love just the one that sticks out its tongue, you know. So you can use things like emojis to actually lighten up communications. Now, obviously, you need to do that in compliance with whatever your corporate, you know, environment is. If you have a really, you know, more staunchy corporate environment, maybe it's not appropriate there. So use your best judgment. But I'm a big fan of the emoji.
Yep. Yep. All right, we're running a little close on time here, so
Yeah.
we'll jump through these really quick. We've
Yeah,
touched on a lot of these.
you can go ahead and pull them up, and I'll run through them really quickly. So best practices for managing your team with emotional intelligence. The first is what we alluded to. How are you feeling is the question of the day and a question of the hour. Take the lead on reaching out at the first sign of emotional intensity, whether even if it's something that is like kind of boiling under the surface, you're not sure what it is. If you feel uncomfortable, there's something happening, and it's either happening with you or it's happening with someone else. So it's important for you to identify which. Increase your empathy and compassion for others right now. Like, give people a little bit of slack and consideration for what's going on in the world, that their response might actually have nothing to do with you. It might have to do with something that's exterior to work. Breathe, meditate, and dunk your face in ice water for 15 seconds. If you do that, it actually stimulates your vagal nerve, and whatever emotion you're having will move through your body very quickly. Emotions only take 90 seconds to process, and these are some tips to help you process them much faster. The other one is to move with your emotions. Emotions are energy in motion. So if you're feeling high intense emotions, it's great to take a walk, dance, or exercise. I highly recommend 5 Rhythms. If you don't know about that, that's a free form dance movement that's specifically around moving emotions. And then the last one is to lead with emotional awareness and trust your gut on this. Trust your intuition. Emotional awareness simply means that you know what the emotion is. And I always recommend that if you think you know what the emotion is, dig a little deeper, because we often, for example, we'll say something is fear, but it might actually be, you know, anxiety. It might be stress, but we're calling it fear because that's the emotion that we're most commonly associating with.
Great, great. All right. Well, I don't have a hard stop, so I can hang around for a few minutes if people have additional questions for us. If you do, go ahead and pop those in the Zoom side panel, and we'll be sure and field those.
Yeah, for sure.
While we wait on that, any anecdotes or primary things that you've personally encountered in trying to cope with what's going on with COVID and work?
Yeah. So I'll be really, really honest with you. I have experienced depression pretty significantly over the last 4 to 5 years. I had three minor strokes in 2014 and 2015 that left me with a serotonin imbalance that wasn't diagnosed immediately. And what I've noticed since, all of this happened is that my own fear responses related to safety approval and control started getting triggered, and I was working more hours. I was under a lot of pressure under work. We're in an industry where an economic downturn can mean a lot in our industry. So there's a lot more pressure about how to do marketing and how to get leads, and the sales team is like begging for leads. And so I did have my own situation where I had to take a step back from work. I had to take a week off just for my own replenishment to kind of get myself back to center because the stress was becoming overwhelming. So I just encourage anyone that is in a situation where you're feeling like your emotions are running rampant and out of control, just take a step back. You might only need an hour, you might need a day, or you might be like me where I needed a week to just stare at the ocean for a bit and not have anyone needing anything from me for a little bit. And whatever you need, right now, if you can't, it's about putting your own oxygen mask on first, because you can't help anyone if you're in a state of emotional intensity.
Great. Jed was asking any plans to resurvey the audience now that we're in the midst of coronavirus.
Yes, I would definitely like to do that. So I'm in the process right now of bringing together some partners to commission another study so that we can actually look at what happens post-COVID. And it's a question of timing, right? Like, when is the best time? Do we wait until it's over? Do we survey in the middle of everything? We're in such a point of unpredictability right now. We know that there's an economic depression coming. We know that the business world is changing. We know that there are industries that are never coming back, and quite frankly, there's going to be a big innovation where some other industries are going to flourish and become even bigger. So yes, and I will let you know when.
Fair enough. All right. I don't see anything else coming through. We're 5 minutes over, so we'll go ahead and wrap this up. But thank you so much, Nicole. Nicole and I will be doing two more of these where we dig into some of the other survey questions as well as some of the cross question analysis. So anybody that's registered for this will get the email notifications to register for the others. So watch out for that. I really hope that you guys will join us for this, for our next two as well. We'll be doing basically one a month for the next couple of months. And then we will send out an email with a link to the recording as well as the deck from this. You can also reply to that email if you have any additional questions or follow up for myself or Nicole. All right. Well, I think that'll do it, Nicole. Thank you so much.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Thanks, everybody.